Let's cut the bullshit.
Just drop the job.
Adam and Simon's Bullshit Busters.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adam and Simon Bullshit Busters. I'm Simon Batchelor,
I am Adam Bastock.
and this week we are going to be asking the big question: is net zero possible by 2030? So the reason we're asking that question this week is there's been a lot of news coverage in the last couple of months of various organisations and government bodies either rolling back, softening, pulling back from all of this kind of language, their net zero targets. And I think it's time that we kind of put forward an alternative narrative to that. So Adam, do you want to start off by sort of talking us through why you think that these people are saying that they can't achieve their net zero targets? What's prompted all this?
Yeah, so I think, and this is a single example. I don't think it's necessarily the entire topic here, but the Scottish Government announced they had to ditch their 2030 climate targets because it was impossible and couldn't be achieved. And I think the danger there is there's two ways to interpret that is, well, actually, they were overambitious and didn't put a credible plan in place, which they were often criticised at the time for having that kind of lack of plan that was perhaps overly reliant on energy and didn't take into account things like diet or transport or the other things that the Climate Change Committee had recommended. However, the outcome of that is that's the sort of knowledgeable inside track, but the way that looks externally is that people get a notification from BBC News that says the Scottish Government have ditched their climate commitments, and it just makes everyone feel a bit rubbish because it feels like, okay, it's too late, it's impossible, why are we bothering with it at all? And I think there's a wider narrative there of the danger of not having a credible plan in place and going, well, actually, this does require action and changes. We do have the technology to achieve it. It just might mean that we need to prioritize differently and be more ambitious with our action. But also, I think we need to not lose focus of the benefits to a society, community, individual level of taking these actions as well. To go, well, it's not really good enough just to ditch those targets when those targets are essentially, do you want your kids to have healthier lives and, play in streets that aren't polluted by kind of gases or riverways that aren't polluted by, sewage and all these things. So there's two tracks there, but I think the biggest concern that I have is that this, on the face of it, looks like a massive rowback, not just from Scottish Government, but also from a lot of other organisations who are saying similar things with their net zero targets, where in the heady days of COP26, maybe they made these quite ambitious targets without really understanding what net zero meant and without really understanding what it would mean for them as an organisation. And the outcome of that, as I say, being a negative reflection in terms of the public of going, oh, maybe it is too late, maybe we can't do this, therefore let's just give up and net zero is not achievable.
Yeah, I think that's one of the dangers, isn't it? Is people seeing like the Scottish Government have pulled back on that target, and it's like, well, they're not giving up completely. They're just saying that that target that they've set was too ambitious, and as you've outlined the reasons why. But I think from a sort of either personal point of view, it does make you think, well, actually, is the action I'm taking even worth it? If a government are saying they can't do it, then what's the point of me doing it? And I think that is part of the danger in the narrative. I mean, in terms of a sort of newspaper level or, even TV news level, it's obviously good news, footage, coverage, headlines, because it gets clicks, doesn't it? And it's sort of fanning that fear, which is what a lot of them rely on these days to get those clicks and to get those views. So I can see why they've kind of leaned into the headlines. And we did do a whole other episode on the danger of misrepresenting climate change in headlines. So without wanting to go too far back down into that, do you think there is anything that can be done to sort of bring that narrative back on track to kind of give people a bit more of a positive story around net zero and the change that people are making?
Yeah, well, I think it's the classic thing really of make it individual, highlight the benefits to the individual of the actions or the policy you're taking, and that might be at a government level, that might be at a business level. People are intrinsically selfish. We need to lean into that and go, well, actually, this is how it's going to make things better. if you look at any of the surveys, most people do support more ambitious action on net zero. Most people do support things like public transport and kind of better policy infrastructure around that. It's just not necessarily seen as a vote winner, and therefore isn't done in the same way that some of the more politicized issues are. But I think that's the problem, is it's a very quiet groundswell where people support it, but they don't necessarily tell people that they support it enough. And therefore there's this green hushing at a societal level of everyone saying that they want to do more, but they can't, but they're not actually talking about that to each other to say, well, actually, here's how you can do it. I think this is where it comes down to that carbon reduction plan piece of going, if you have a strong sustainability story or a strong carbon reduction story to tell, and that might be in the future, and say, well, we can't do these things because we are a small business and we are waiting for kind of infrastructure to update to allow us to do so. But here's our intent. Here's the practical things we've achieved. Here's the things that we can't do that we maybe are still investigating because it's quite difficult. That in itself is far more powerful than where we're at the minute, where everyone's saying, oh, do you know what, this seems quite hard actually, I'm not going to bother. And the answer is, well, yes, it is hard, but running a business is quite hard, and yet loads of people are out there doing that because the opportunity and the risk is there to have the control over your life and to earn a better living and be a better person. Whatever that means to you, that doesn't necessarily mean charitable. That might just mean a better person from a lifestyle and health point of view. And I think the challenge we've got with net zero is immediately it's a very technical term that talks about carbon emissions, which no one really cares about and knows what they actually mean, apart from a broader trend. But if I tell a small business their footprint is 1 million tons or 100 tons, it doesn't really make a much difference to their daily life. It is, it's not quantifiably different in that sense. So what the actual benefits to the individual of those actions, and focusing on that to drive the aspiration up. And I think this is the challenge we have with businesses more generally around net zero, is that people see it as a policy tick box exercise rather than a business transformation piece, where actually the businesses that are going to win out by 2030 are the ones that are more efficient, leaner, more kind of profitable, more resilient to shocks to their system, because they've taken the warnings on climate change seriously and acted accordingly. A business that has got an electrified fleet with solar panels and a battery pack and a heat pump and LEDs and localized supply chains is going to be far more resilient to those shocks than businesses that haven't. That is not to say that getting there is easy, but the reward will be that you are chosen for contracts, that you earn more money, and that you have a far more lean operation. So I think that's the real selling point of this, is that we might lose sight of the actual benefits of the individual actions it takes to get to net zero, rather than just focusing on what net zero means and what a 2030 or a 2050 target means, because who cares, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think there's definitely something in that sense of, as a small business, you obviously have a team of people that you interact with, and that might be your direct team or your employees, but it could also be your supply chain. And I think by having that conversation and by introducing in the concept that you are taking this seriously and you want to do something about it, you want to be leading that change, you bring people along with you on that journey and help them sort of appreciate a little bit more about maybe some of the things they're learning about at work or as part of being in your supply chain that they might want to then take out into their own personal lives. So I was speaking to a chap the other day who runs a haulage firm down near me in Brighton, and he was saying that he has so recently taken over the firm and wants to start to work towards decarbonising a haulage firm. That's quite a big target, right? So he thought, well, I'm going to need the team on board. And his initial thoughts were, well, I'm not entirely sure this is going to be an easy sell, because his preconception of what his whole team would think about trying to decarbonise a very long-standing business of diesel engine vehicles, he thought was going to be quite a tough sell. But actually, after one conversation, most of them were on board and were really keen to do something about it, because they had been thinking, while they're driving their trucks, thinking, I'm not entirely comfortable with this. This feels really weird and at odds with what I'm hearing and seeing around me. And I sort of wanted to do something about it. So actually his preconception of the fact that people wouldn't be behind him was misplaced, and actually been really pleasantly surprised by how much the team have wanted to get on board and have given him ideas and support. And they're doing some great things down there, and I think it's just a really encouraging story of how even a business that is running diesel vehicles can be making a positive change and has his whole team on board.
And this is something we've seen in workshops that we've run as well, is the people who are attending are doing it because they're concerned for their grandchildren's future, and they're seeing the news and they're scared, and they're going, actually, the one influence I can have is through the business that I've been running for 30 years. And these are not people who you would normally think of as kind of climate activists, but they're suddenly very concerned about it and they want to do something about it. And that's the lever they're trying to pull. So I think there's a danger with the headlines as well of feeling like the battle is lost, or that suddenly everyone's giving up on this. But I think it might actually have the opposite effect, where the news cycle starts focusing in on people don't want this, and isn't net zero impossible, and no one's acting on it. And then that is actually in reality going to drive more fear in individuals, who are then going to go, well, if the government is not doing anything, what can I do about it? What can I do in my kind of personal life, and where do I start? And that might be then through their businesses and through their employment. And as you say, the guy that you mentioned, the business is full of people who are thinking that but staying silent because they don't know what to do about it. And as soon as he opens that conversation up and opens that opportunity, suddenly everyone steps up and goes, oh, well, I've actually been thinking about this for ages. I'm really scared. What can we do about it? So, yeah, don't underestimate that level of discourse. Or, yeah, I think it's always that, and I always say this, but don't underestimate the power of asking a question, because you never know what people might be thinking behind that, and being quiet. So I do think there's two ways to look at the announcements recently around the recalibration of net zero targets. Is that, yes, we need to be doing more. Yes, the ambition has been there, but not the practical actual action. That doesn't mean it's impossible. We can do more. Things like trams, for example. The biggest challenge, I think, with the Scottish Government target specifically was that they only looked at energy, and they didn't perhaps go as far in terms of policy decisions around things like transport or social change. But that's not to say we can't. We have the technology. We know that putting in trams shifts people away from private vehicles, and a tram is still lower carbon than an electric car is, just because of the way physics works. And therefore, we can still decarbonise and achieve deep reductions with these changes. The question is not, can we do it? It is, how do we get more people to do it? And how do we drive the demand and drive that desire? And I think that's where small businesses play a huge kind of key role, is in taking that mantle up and going, well, look, here's what we've done, here's what we would like to do, but here are the things that we're blocked by locally, and making sure that you're ratcheting the pressure on that through your local communities in order to drive that demand and make sure that we don't lose target of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because there's a lot of action you can inspire as a small business. And I think collectively, the more we talk about that, the more we share about that, it's the reason we rebooted the podcast, wasn't it? To start talking about some of the things we're learning and talking about in different sessions and workshops we're running, and also just to react to some of these news pieces. And I suppose if there's one positive thing we can say about the news, it's that the news cycle changes very fast. And as we know from politics, especially here in the UK, they're not really thinking more than about a month in advance, really. So actually, the politics changes as fast as the news cycle. So I think, Wiley, what we can hope for is that actually we get a lot more positive news coming and a lot more positive political action coming in the next few years, as both of those things start to evolve and change, and as that momentum builds. So if you would like to find out more about how you can tell that story as a small business, how you can lead the change, you could be one of the people who are making a positive impact and telling people about it, then do check out the Small 99 website. There is a carbon footprint measurement tool, so you can work out where you are now, but also recognise a lot of the things you've already done, because most small businesses have already taken loads of actions, but just didn't even realise that was an action that they could be taking. So recognise your wins, work out a starting point, and start to tell that story on the Small 99 website. And we'll be back soon with some more myth busting and some lovely stories to tell. So thanks for everybody for listening and watching. See you next time.
Speak to you soon.
Bye.
Let's cut the bullshit.
Just drop the job.
Adam and Simon's Bullshit Busters.